Hello and welcome back to Inquisitor Martyr. Last time we completed more of the Void Crusade, and we are only 3 missions away from completion. We just have this one, and this one. So we might as well start and get these going. Okay, that's actually completely doable. Nothing like starting and instantly getting attacked. Not a second of peace for me. But I was talking with a few friends of mine about the games industry lately, and we had an idea. And this sounds insane, but hear me out. I think the sheer number of indies is actually a net negative. Think about it. So, when you think about like the PlayStation 2, the Xbox, the GameCube, that era, there were a ton of games. PlayStation 2, I want to say it was close to like 9,000 games in its lifespan. People were making tons of games. Yeah, some were not that good. But we also had a bit lower expectations, but generally games met that expectation. It was hard to actually have bad games. You had unpopular games, but few were like, at least to my memory, were just flat out dumpster fires. You didn't have, like, Big Rigs Off-Road for the PS1. That game will always live infamously for having bridges that didn't have collision meshes, so you just drove through them and stuff like that. Truly unfinished games. And then during the PS3, we still had, like, the thousands, but it was, I think, around 2,000 games. And then last gen, we were only in the 3 digits for games. And the thing I've kind of realized is, as these console game numbers have gone down, one part of that is the 2008 financial crisis. I will always argue it. We never recovered from it. Anyone who says we did lies. Because the games industry was absolutely gut shot and has been bleeding out ever since. Way too many studios ended up collapsing and getting bought out, and just things never improved. Everybody condensed into operating out of like the Bay Area, and the cost of making these games went up because everybody's paying for staff to live in a place that it takes 8 people to pay for a house, rather than being able to spread out and actually have people live reasonably. Because I can tell you here now, the cost of living in Nebraska, I don't even live in Nebraska. I don't know anyone who lives in Nebraska. But I've looked, the cost of living is way better than trying to live in the Bay Area. You can say, oh, we got Bay Area rapid transit. I don't care if you got the BART. You still need 8 dudes in a house to pay for the house. But you can live in, like, Nebraska, Wyoming, Alabama. You can live there dirt cheap. But we saw this decline in games over the years, and an increase in indie games. And I think that has kind of hurt the industry. Because when you look at a lot of these indie games, they're indie. You're looking at maybe like a staff of 5 to 10 people.
Electrospectral scanning revealed info fragments of high importance in close proximity.
And because of that very small staff count, these games get reined in more and more. That's why when you look at a lot of these indie games, it's like, oh, here's our quirky, I don't know.
Executed and indicates essential info fragments, Inquisitor. Data has been inloaded.
Okay. Had to wait for him to shut up. But these games become like, oh, here's our quirky 8-bit game. And we see it a million times. Oh, the character is 3 different colors and only requires like 25 pixels. Yeah, it works. But did you really have to use like Unreal Engine 5 for this? Or it's these super high concept games where they're like, in a dark dystopian future, use cyber hardware and your wits to fight the evil corporation from turning everyone into cyber slaves. And it's just like Mario. Like OG Mario level graphics and gameplay. These super high concept, low design games where you could probably weed out a bunch of these games that, because they're high concept, low design, end up being trash. You could probably weed them out if you merge some of these studios together to produce better games. And I remember seeing this, God, this was, I think, a few years ago at this point. Yeah, definitely a few years ago. It was indie devs. They were talking about how releasing on Steam is so risky. Because what would happen is a lot of these guys didn't have marketing budgets. Because they're 5 to 10 people, maybe 20 people. They barely have a budget at all. And the problem is, you do this, and they said you'd release your game, but it would instantly just get swept away in the tide of games coming out any day on Steam. You didn't really have an opportunity to stand out. You had a brief window, and you had to hope and pray that it was that, or your game would get picked up by like a streamer or a YouTuber. A great one that I can think of, have you heard of the game Gunfire Reborn? It's a roguelite FPS game. Guy I watch sometimes streaming, he played it. And it was like early access, streamer access kind of deal. And then the game came out. Didn't hear anything about it. It just died. I think the devs still support it. I don't know. But, and that's part of it too, is the curse of early access. People get their fill when the game's out early, and then by the time it actually is completed, nobody remembers it. And I genuinely think a lot of these studios need to merge. They don't need to turn into Treyarch, Infinity Ward, 1,200-man studios. But they need to merge and become a little bit bigger. Pool their assets. Because how many times do we see the same story or end up hearing later on, oh yeah, this developer mortgaged their house to make the game, and the game failed. And I'm sitting here going, damn, maybe you guys need to get more people together so that you can have a bit more of a project to show investors, to show publishers to get money, to put on Kickstarter, something, so that you don't have to mortgage your house and risk being homeless. And it was something I was thinking about. And the more and more I thought about, the more I had realized we need to kind of curb how many indie studios there are. And I use indie as in tiny indie, as opposed to just, you're not a slave to one of the big publishers. Because I think we could, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. I'm not going to lie to myself and say, oh, we could have a renaissance of the PS2 era and have thousands of games and it'll be fantastic. No, I do not think we are going to get back to that. Unless we have a full-bore industry collapse You know, it crashes so hard. No survivors kind of crash, which I can't imagine it happening. It just won't. I hate the too big to fail moniker, because I think it's BS, because anything can fail. But I genuinely think the games industry as it is too big to actually collapse on itself. This isn't the 80s. This isn't even 2008, where how many studios actually had public investment. Now with IPOs, you can just sit here and go to some banking dweeb who doesn't know a thing about games and be like, oh yeah, we're gonna put grammatronic microtransactions in it, and you can say the most inane shit ever. You can lie and say stuff that doesn't exist. You think a guy who does banking knows anything about this? He's gonna go, damn, that sounds fancy. How much is that gonna cost you? You just sit there, we'll need like $10 million. They'll go, okay, yeah, that sounds fair. It's not the old days. But I really think indies need to pool their resources. Plus, some of these games kind of suck. You do get some good, like, sleeper hits, like Loop Hero. That was a cool game. Really simple concept. Hey, you have a hero running around a map, like just a path, build stuff for him to fight and power up. From the outside, that sounds like the most basic concept, and it is. But then the depth gets added. Oh, I gotta look at that. That'd be cool, but I'm not a melee build. We'll save it. Because I want to keep the loot quantity for when we crack open all our stuff. But short of that, everything else can kind of get mulched. And one of the problems I have too with kind of arguing this issue of like, hey, we need to kind of curb some of these indies and merge them together, is people will always be like, oh, what about games like Vampire Survivors? Yes, you can have anomalies. How many of these indie games have we seen that are just trash? How many have we seen over the years were asset flips? Admittedly, if we go off my analytics, a lot of you are old enough to remember this. But in case someone is younger, around 2013, we had a huge problem with people just taking asset packs for games, bundling them and reselling them. There was one that was like a Minecraft-ish zombie survival thing, something kind of like Unturned. And I saw that rebundled and sold about 5 times. And that's what you tend to see with a lot of these indies, is they're just buying off-the-shelf parts. And because of that, these games aren't that good, and they struggle. They gamble on a good initial sale. And it's essentially, instead of having a proper round of funding or cutting deals, it's, oh, well, if we get a good initial sale round, then we'll be able to support the game and actually do stuff for it. If not, well, that's on you. And we've had issues like with 7 Days to Die. Granted, 7 Days to Die for the console version, that was a mix of the devs just not really caring and the devs being so legally illiterate that they sold, or essentially gave away the rights to their game on console and had to buy them back because they were incredibly dense. I may enjoy the game, 7 Days to Die is fun, but I will never stop trashing those devs for being that dumb. This is word to the wise for anyone. If you have a contract, talk to a lawyer. Find one that specializes in whatever you're doing and have them look at it. Yeah, it costs you money, but it's better to pay a little money now than to not and get hoed. Because you could sit there and be like, oh, this isn't a big deal. And look at the MCNs for YouTube back in the day. There were perpetuity clauses in some of those. There were so many things written into some of those clauses and some of those contracts that you absolutely should have seen a lawyer for them. But people didn't sign them. Or at least they didn't read them, and so they signed them and signed away tons of stuff. There were creators who, they realized how screwed they were, that they found it better to quit YouTube back in the heyday of YouTube than to actually do anything else. Because they ended up signing away the rights to any additional channels they made while their contracts were active. And that shows you how badly people need lawyers for any kind of legal things. But yeah, pulling this back to the gaming side, it's just... I look at what we've seen made by small teams. Not hyper small indie teams, but you look back at, like, just smaller teams back in the day. Grab a PlayStation game. Grab an Xbox game. And you will find something made by not a lot of people, but it had a lot of heart. I'll always use Kingdom Under Fire. Kingdom Under Fire: The Crusaders was an astounding game. And if you took some of these indie studios, lumped them together, and said, hey, numbnuts, we're making this, you could probably have a cool game come out. You can make cool stuff. These guys just need to kind of circle the wagons a little bit. And I just fear they won't, because everybody wants to be the top dog. It's like, recently I heard that that game Goodbye Volcano High apparently bundled all the code in their demo. So they accidentally gave the game away for free. Or at least the story is all within the files. They didn't cut anything out for the demo version. And I think that's a big problem too, is games that are not well done because they don't have all the people and the expertise that's needed. This is the curse. I've seen this in so many studios. I see this. Hell, go on to LinkedIn and look at game designer jobs. You will find 10-man studios max who are like, oh, well, we want you to be able to design, program, do the art, do the market research, and you look at it and you're like, you need a team. You can't keep trying to lump multiple jobs on people, and that's why these games suffer. That's why these games suck. That's why they, at best, are 8-bit games, because they just don't want to get the people needed. The games don't need to be Call of Duty. They don't need to be God of War. There's a reason those games are starting to be branded as quadruple A games, because their budgets are going so high that they cannot be classified in the AAA space anymore. And realistically, that AAA space is going to be open. I'd argue the AA space is still wide open. Too many people are willing to rest in the indie section and then suffer the fate, like I said. Release a game, find out they released when a torrent of other games came out, and then they're going, oh damn, we didn't get enough sales to recoup our losses. And part of it, I think, is consoles. They need to do console sales. Yeah, it sucks. You gotta pay for licensing. Yeah, it sucks. You gotta pay for doing updates. But if enough studios start coming together like, hey, PlayStation, hey, or well, Sony, or hey, Microsoft, we would like to release our games on your system. You can potentially try to cut a deal. Say, hey, give us reduced costs on sending patches through. And if there's enough going on, these guys can start going, yeah, we can afford to charge a little bit less on doing the testing because there's enough demand. But we'll just have to wait and see how the industry pans out, because as much as I'd love for seeing these smaller studios kind of merge and become bigger players and produce far better games, I highly doubt it. It's sadly, I think, a pipe dream. Even though it would most likely do the industry a lot better and do us players a lot better. Let's see, what's this look like? Don't care about focus state, but the shield boost is nice. Losing 2 bionics sucks, but I have enough to cover it and I don't lose anything. Shield HP regen, yeah, sure. That's actually worthwhile. But that is all for now. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit the like button, it helps out the channel a lot, and if you haven't already, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.